Welcome to Make It, a new weekly show where we'll be talking with photographers to get into their heads and understand their creative style and approach. I'm Josh, and I'll be your host. This week, we're talking with Jen Huang, a photographer that specializes in weddings, lifestyle, and editorial photography. Let's go chat with Jen. Hey, Jen, how you doing?
Great, how are you?
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What kind of photography do you do?
Mainly I shoot weddings, and I also do a mix of editorial and lifestyle and commercial work as well.
I've seen a lot of your work, but to describe your style, what would you say, or how would you describe it?
I would describe it as light-filled, romantic, and natural. Right. And I'm a film shooter.
Seems like film is having its own little renaissance. How did you get into film photography, or have you always been doing film photography?
I have kind of always been doing film photography, and I feel like every photographer says they start out shooting film. My dad actually was my teacher, and when I was very young, we used to load film and shoot together, and I would use all of his, medium format cameras. And as I, matured into a photographer and have my own business, I actually started shooting film full-time at weddings. I never thought it was going to be a career. I always thought it was a hobby. It was something I really loved. I love art in general. Once I graduated, I got, a quote-unquote real job that my parents approved of, and it was working for a large advertising agency in New York. And it was one of those glamorous jobs that any girl I think would have really loved to have, and I absolutely hated it. And so I started shooting on the side. I was making a little bit of extra money and also just doing something I loved, and eventually just started making more at my side job than at my real job, and just felt like this is a great time for me to jump out and jump off the ship and go and do my own thing.
And so how do you find the kind of inspiration for your creativity? I mean, you have like a really, really interesting style. How did you come to that style, and how do you get inspired?
I think that's changed throughout my entire career. When I first started, it was a lot of seeing what other people were doing and then, imitating the work that I thought was good. And now I would say, now it's almost 8 years down the line, I'm the exact opposite. I don't want to see what other people are doing. I want to be inspired by things that are completely out of my comfort zone, that are out of my industry. Art history, a lot of the time, I feel like old masters, they did it right. And there's no going wrong with that. I like to look at paintings, museums, oil paintings especially. I do oil painting myself, and I am terrible at it. But when you think about it, if someone like Vermeer was creating a painting, he would spend months on one painting. Whereas when we take photos, we're just snapping away every 5 seconds. And to be able to think about a photo the way that someone thought about a painting is really interesting to me. And that's kind of how I apply that to my own work.
So it sounds like you have, and we talked about, like, you've got this very, very specific style. And I think for a lot of photographers, coming up with their own unique style, it's a long, arduous process.
Yes.
And I imagine you didn't start off with that style. Walk us through that life cycle, where you came from and how you went through those different cycles to get to where you are today.
In the first 2 years, most of my work was just capturing weddings very photojournalistically. And as I started working with more vendors, creating more editorial shoots, that's when I started thinking, okay, I have creative control over this shoot. Where am I taking it? Am I just shooting what's in front of me, or am I actually going to insert myself and decide what I shoot, how I shoot it, how to compose? And I think that over the last, 6 years of my career really forced me to figure out exactly what it was that I wanted in an image, exactly how I want it to look. So I think it was just kind of a learning process throughout my career, just thinking, well, if I'm going to be successful, I have to do things that will make other people think, wow, that's different, and that's not something I usually see in weddings. And when I first started, being a wedding photographer wasn't like this glamorous job. People who were wedding photographers usually just wore all black and vests, and they were shooting these events that no one really wanted to do. It wasn't very high paying, and I don't think I would have been able to survive in that type of industry, but I really wanted to change the industry into something that I could flourish in. So for me, a big part of growth was not just refining my work, but also refining the career itself and the job itself.
That's great. I think a lot of people can get a lot of inspiration from that. I'd love to take a look at some of your photos and have you talk us through some of your approaches,
Sure.
And that'd be really awesome. Maybe you can walk us through a couple of these photos.
Sure. So now my work is 100% film, and I'm shooting mostly medium format, and I'm also shooting a little bit of 35 millimeter. For me, the top things that attract me to a photo is lighting and also composition. So an image like this, to me, it has that beautiful glow. This is indoors, but the glow is coming from natural light outdoors. So I'm always looking for a scene that has beautiful existing natural light. Here, once again, really looking for that light, seeing the light on the ground and putting her in it. That's a big part of my work. So people see my images and they'll go, oh, I really like it, but they don't understand how much work it actually took to create that image and how picky I am about, is that napkin folded right? Is that fork the right, distance from the table? So everything about an image that I create, there's a lot of thought behind it, and there's a lot of looking on the edges of my viewfinder to make sure that what I want in the image is exactly what it is in the image.
I think it's a really good point. Like the idea of looking at the edges, looking at all parts of the viewfinder, there's something that we have a tendency as photographers, especially when we're brand new as photographers, is just getting the shot, and you're like really focused on the subject, and you're really focused, and then these things that you didn't think about, whether it's a tree growing out of somebody's head, or it's something poking in, or there's some text that is just like distracting. It's,
totally.
So really, it's a hard lesson to learn for me. It was, at least.
Right, and things like, for example, there's 4 plates on this table, but 2 of them are cut off on the sides, so that you don't have 4 circles in a row. Like all of that, you have to think about when you're creating this image. And this is really more of my editorial work. So I get a lot of inquiries from wedding vendors who want me to shoot kind of commercial work for their lookbooks and portfolios. And images like this, I think, are like my favorite type of images to create. They're very simple. They're very much about the person who's being photographed. And the technique, they're very strong in technique, because you have to use close-up filters, you've got to use really beautiful natural light, you have to know your film, you have to know your posing, and you have to direct. And directing is probably the hardest thing for most photographers to do when they start out, because you just want to hang out behind your camera and not do anything. So I interject myself a lot into every single pose and make sure that it's exactly right, exactly how I want it to be.
And so did your editorial work, is that how you transitioned to also shooting stock photography? How did that all work together?
Actually I didn't think about it like that, but yeah, I think it really did. Because when Adobe contacted me for stock photography, some of the images that they had selected were from my editorial work. And I think they saw that what wedding vendors see is that these are marketable images, and they're very, very clean and focused on what they're trying to sell, if it is going to be a product or something like that.
Really curious, like if you were to share, let's say, 5 tips that you wanted to give to wedding or editorial or stock photographers, what would you say? What would be your top 5 off the top of your head tips to being a better photographer?
Okay, so number 1, I would say, and I've said this before in our interview, but look for inspiration outside of the wedding industry. I think it's really easy to get caught up with everything that's going on in the industry, and it really just kills your joy, it kills your inspirations. Number 2, shoot less, but shoot with more intentionality. So when you're taking a photo, don't take 20 of one scene. Really figure out what you want in that photo and capture it. Number 3, practice. A lot of practice. And I think that a lot of wedding photographers especially start out kind of as amateur photographers without the technique. And I think it's really important that they learn the technique, understand how a camera works, understand how editing works, understand film if they're going to be a film photographer, and get the technique strong before they do anything else. And stick to their personal inner beliefs. So if you're passionate about color, then be passionate about color. Don't say, well, I saw Jen's work and it's all pastels. That's never going to work for you. If it doesn't actually ring a bell in your heart, then it's never going to be something you're successful at. And finally, I would say be professional. And what I mean by that is, it's not just about I'm a creative, I'm doing my art, and I'm creating these beautiful images. If you're a wedding photographer, you have a huge responsibility to your client. So on one hand, you have to be an artist. On the other hand, you need to respond to emails. You have to answer the phone. You have to do Skype calls, which I hate. And you have to know your pricing and know the market. So I think for a business person and not an artist, if you want to succeed in weddings, you have to be a good business person. Well, thanks, Jen. Really appreciate you coming out here and sharing your beautiful photos. And thank you for watching Make It, and see you next week.